I'm going to talk about product design and news, or building stuff that doesn't suck, that people want and may even pay for. And I like to start with a quote from Jason Fried, formerly of 37 Signals, now Basecamp. And I think this is kind of these are words to live by in an industry such as mine, where every day the business model is being undercut, and when we're required to invent and imagine new ways to keep journalism afloat. But before I get into that, let me talk a little bit about how I got to this part of the journey. And it actually goes back to 2007. This is my hometown, Minneapolis, Minnesota. And this is the I-35W bridge over, God, is it the Minnesota or Mississippi River? I'm embarrassed to say, I don't remember which. One of the two. It starts with an M. And on the morning of, I think it was August 1st, it collapsed. This bridge was built 40 plus years ago. It was a design that was since determined to be very structurally suspect. It was in a state of significant disrepair. And like most news organizations with a data team, within an hour, we at the New York Times had a database out, and we were scouring that thing for bridges that were, similar design, also deemed to be structurally deficient. Boom, we had that within an hour. Our competitors suddenly started doing stuff with that data. They started creating maps. They started putting things online. 1 week later, the New York Times published that. This is what interactive graphics, interactive data looked like for the New York Times in 2007. Not too far before that, this is what our election coverage looked like. This is 2004. This is only 2 years removed from a point where the New York Times was hand updating election results on the website. Many of the interactive graphics that the graphics desk were doing at the time when I started were also being hand updated. They were being, these large spreadsheets were being maintained by graphics editors. They're being, again, hand updated and pushed to our content, our CDN. That is inefficient and silly. And so I started agitating around the organization along with Matt Erickson, the deputy graphics editor, and a couple of developers to try to create a team in the newsroom that could help fix this problem. And that's the team that I run Interactive News, or at least that's what the experiment was about. The original idea was to get developers into the newsroom so that we could create more immersive, more dynamic, deeper, data-driven interactives. And what that led us to is our interactives that are more like that, which was our 2008 election night. Here you have the ability to bring in designers, graphics folks, and developers who can build dynamic, data-driven interactives that actually tell a story. And you can do this much more efficiently because none of this stuff is being hand updated. Again, we're creating maps like this. The graphics desk can do what they do well, create a map, and the data team can do what they do well and figure out how to get that data in quickly so that map can update and people can see it. Very cool. We started getting more ambitious about the kinds of projects we could do. So we started building, for lack of a better word, the virtual, the sort of the web equivalent of a special section. We got very, after the Beijing Olympics, we used to buy, for example, the hosted product from the AP for the Olympics, and it was terrible. The design was terrible. We couldn't make it look like a New York Times quality thing. And so from Vancouver on, we decided, to heck with that. We're just going to take the data feed ourselves and build the site. Well, we didn't know how much work this was going to be, but it was an enormous amount of work, but worth it. And so we can build now these very customized, very deep, immersive sites that take content, that take stories, photos, images, whatever it is, and treat the content the way it should be treated, not just try to crowbar all of this content into the 4 square walls of templates that our content management system provides. So that's the capability that my team provided. We've started working on different storytelling forms. This is what we call the dashboard. There are different flavors of the dashboard. This is the one from the Oscars last year. And the concept here was a sort of a Mystery Science Theater 3000 deal with David and Tony. They were talking over the entire broadcast and cracking wise while casting out to our Twitter audience, which you can see on the right, and the live blog streaming down. Again, this is a platform that we built pretty much from scratch, driven by WordPress. We would do similar things for debates. Here, we were trying to add some functionality. On the right, you can see we're doing live fact-checking. So readers in real time could submit questions. And we had the politics desk had agreed to take a couple reporters and set them aside to actually answer those questions within the span of a debate, and we would then pipe those answers credited to with the question credited to the original questioner in them. We're doing a lot with photos, and particularly around social and engagement. We did this project, Instagramming the election on election day, where we were pulling in images from Instagram and then creating a piece of journalism from it, telling the story of what's going on during election day. Probably the most ambitious project we've worked on, we worked on this last year, was a series of stories that Libby Rosenthal did about medical costs. And here we did, we took a kind of a page out of Snowfall where which I think organically, very beautifully integrated the text and graphics and other kinds of imagery, moving video. We wanted to do the same with engagement. So here, we're prompting the user to basically find themselves in the data. We would take the interactive graphics and sort of put them within the text. Again, this is interrupting the read. It's not a secondary element like in our standard templates. It's actually part of the story, and it comes contextually when the reporter is talking about that particular topic. And again, here we're doing a call out for reader comment, but we're not doing it as a secondary element to the story. We're doing it, again, contextually right in the middle of the story, interrupting the story, and then presenting some of the better responses as part of the actual content. One of the amazing things about this, just as a kind of a side note, readers do the darndest things. When you provide a text field and no kind of prompt, you will get all kinds of responses, some of them good, a lot of them not. When you ask readers a very focused question that is in the context of what they are reading at the moment on a topic that they feel very strongly about, guess what? You get amazing responses, and you get a lot of them. We played around a little bit with structuring comments at the bottom to try to give you a better sense, sort of a metadata. We're applying sort of metadata to the comments themselves, so you could tell, you could make some sense out of these comments, which, you know, they're all over the board usually. But here you could filter it by insured versus uninsured versus questions that they answered, and sort of get a better sense of what you're seeing. Again, it's bringing all of this sort of engagement together. And finally, if you answered one of the open-ended questions, near the end you were prompted with this, which is essentially a solicitation to be a source for us. Tell us a little bit about yourself, give us some contact information, and let us bring you into the story. Now, so how did this do? It did pretty darn well. Prior to this, the most comments that I'm aware of that we've received on any particular item, single piece of content on a single day, was around 3,800 on Nate Silver's blog on election day. This got 17,000 responses. Of those, 8,900 people submitted, sent us information about themselves and said, yes, I would like to be a source for your reporting. And to me, obviously, this points in one direction, which is this is a very powerful device to try to have more of a two-way conversation with readers, to bring them into the actual journalism and have that at scale. But on the other hand, this is a pretty darn good product. I feel like what we've done here is we've taken sort of the old approach of journalism, which is we speak, you listen, and we've tried to turn it into more of a conversation. I would say that this is an improvement. And that's sort of like kind of where I've finally come to with what my team actually does. I see my team as basically an editorial product development team. And I'm not ashamed to say it. And in that sense, design matters a lot for us. But I'm not really talking about aesthetic design, because I don't have designers on my team. Well, I do. I have a couple designers on my team, but that's not fundamentally what we do. We basically do product design. And of late, I have to say, I've been engaged in a couple of projects that are very deeply involved using user-centered product design. I find user-centered product design to be a pretty cool process that newsrooms should be using more and more often. I don't profess to be an expert in any sense, so I'm just sort of here spreading the good word. But the process that we're using is basically designing products to solve real problems. It's going to users and finding out what they want and not forcing them to come to you. This seems like kind of no-duh sort of stuff, but you'd be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't, how often those sorts of basic rules are ignored. How we design things, we don't test them. How we design interfaces, we don't test them. We design navigation. We try to reinvent the wheel over and over again. And maybe that's a good idea, maybe it's not. But I do feel like we should be a little more reader-focused, user-centered in our design. By and large, newsrooms are not great at this, and our apps are a pretty darn good example. So to take it forward a little bit more, part of my current job, the job that involves the douchey title, involves new product. So I was early on involved in a project on the business side that is about trying to find expanding our suite of products. We're building and launching 4 new products this year, one of which is an app. That app is designed to target different kinds of subscribers, folks who are New York Times loyalists, people who read the New York Times, but for various reasons, because of the price, because of whatever, they haven't subscribed. So it'll be at a lower price point. And so I was involved in this very early on. And where we started was with something called a conjoint analysis. Does anybody here know what a conjoint analysis is? OK, a couple people. I had never heard of such a thing as a conjoint analysis. We had brought in McKinsey to do this, and they had gone through and said, OK, where are opportunities for new products? In the suite of things that the New York Times could do, where are the opportunities? And we got some vague direction from them about what it is that we should be doing. Should we be building an app? Should we be targeting older readers, younger readers, international readers? What is it? What are the kinds of features we could put together? What is the kind of product we could put together? And so conjoint analysis, as I understand it, and I admit to you that this is oversimplified, it kind of works like this. You break it down into a series of features, you put them in front of readers, and you have them kind of rank them. And then the things that kind of bubble up to the top, you sort of say, well, look, we know you love Taco Bell. We know you love Pizza Hut. Would you pay for Pizza Hut and Taco Bell together? That's all kinds of awesome, right? Basically, that's it. I probably just butchered that over there, right? Am I wrong? I mean, that's kind of it, right? Yeah, they have to prioritize. OK. It's basically that. So where did we start? We started with a very vague idea of what this new product should be. And it had to be at a lower price point, and it had to appeal to a certain kind of reader. And very quickly, we migrated to an app. And we started thinking to ourselves, well, God, what is it about our apps that currently kind of suck? What can you know about people that you really don't know right now, right? What are the kinds of things that are specific to mobile that make them an interesting news platform that might satisfy our goal of this product, and so you can know a lot of. Well, actually, I was just in Philadelphia, so I should have updated this slide. That's really embarrassing. You can know a lot about people based on what's on the phone. But look at our apps, right? Here's our front page. Here's our home page. And here's our iPad app in a moment. And now those things all pretty much are the same, aren't they? I mean, you're pretty much just sort of putting content on a page. It looks a little bit like a broadsheet, and you really wouldn't know that this was necessarily a mobile app unless I put that around it for you, OK? So we started with that as a premise. Could we build an app that has many of the characteristics that utilizes the devices, that utilizes mobile in particular, and news and put them together. The process that we used, which again, it's very user-centered, is pretty straightforward. It's basically brainstorm, prototype, test assumptions, learn, rinse, repeat. Multiple iterations. It's very much like Agile in that sense, where you're doing constant loops. You're moving to the prototype stage very, very quickly. So brainstorms, bam, you sit around, you just throw stuff out. What are your assumptions? What do you think we should be building? What do you think the important features are for this particular target audience? Who is our target audience for this? Boom, 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 boom. And then you quickly move to a prototype stage. Now, prototype can look very basic, and I don't mean like a functional prototype all the time. I mean, like in this case, it was often, almost always, paper prototypes that we would even put in front of people, in front of potential users who met our target audience and said, well, what do you think of this? We did things that they called provocations. So provocations were pretty interesting. I had never seen this before. But the idea here is to take individual features and test them individually. So we would never create a single product around this concept of just enough news, or do we want to create. The idea here, though, that we were testing is, do readers want something that is limited, right? Do they want an edition-based product, or do they want, something else? And I'm telling you, a lot of us walked into this brainstorm convinced that there's too much out there, there's too much noise, people want limited amount of news. Well, guess what? We went out and we tested this idea, this kind of kernel of an idea, and nobody was telling us they felt overwhelmed. Nobody was telling us. Now, you wouldn't base that much on that kind of feedback, but getting that kind of feedback leads you in a direction, well, certainly leads you away from a potential cliff. If we had come up with a product that was fundamentally, where the core feature was an addition, and it would have rung incredibly hollow with readers, we would have known why. Here's another example of a provocation. Do you want the New York Times to kind of guide you? Do you want the intelligence of the Times editors? Do you want us to sort of help you find the good stuff? And actually, this tested extremely well. So where else were we looking for inspiration? We're looking in the market. We're looking at products like Circa. Circa is certainly flawed in some ways, but in terms of the concept, in terms of a product, in terms of a product idea, I think it's kind of brilliant, because what it does is it kind of takes the news and it mobilizes it for you. It breaks it down into, it sort of atomizes a news story, and it presents it to you in small kind of chunks that work on a phone. My mom reads books on a phone. She's the only one I know who does that. Maybe other people here do, but I find, oh, you do? What is it with you? I don't understand that. I can't read more than like 500 words on the phone. It drives me crazy. But Circa, so what they're trying to do is take news and break it down to distill it down into its atomic level, just the stuff you need. But you can go read the whole story, but they're going to give it to you in chunks. You're going to do other things like alerts. They're going to alert you when this story changes or when there are developments. You can follow stories. Things that you can do that you just can't do on our website right now, or our apps. We looked at products like Zeit, which does an amazing job, well, pretty good job, of passive personalization, of finding stuff based on your reading habits that you might like. I don't know if you've seen Paper. We have some Facebook people here. Yeah. It is gorgeous. It is a pretty amazing product. It's been described, you can plug your ears at this part, it's been described by many people as Facebook for people who hate Facebook. I think that's actually kind of an accurate description. It does many of the things that the Facebook app does, but it does a tremendous job of utilizing your social graph of social recommendations to recommend things to you topically that you might like. I think it's a pretty amazing app. And finally, there's Inside, which just launched. Well, maybe it didn't just launch. It's been around a little bit, a couple of months. And this is a similar idea to Zeit, where they're taking and they're atomizing news, they're chunking it up, but it's human editors who are doing the aggregation here. Okay, so the elements that we're looking at are aggregation, chunking news, following topics, finding ways to make news more mobile, and to present news in the form on a phone that in ways that we currently don't now. And so I'm gonna, I can't actually show you the app. I apologize for that. It's gonna launch in a few weeks. I know, that's a total, that's awful, isn't it? I'm sorry. I really, believe me, I wish I could. It's really cool. I worked on it for about the first half. I know, that sucked. I'm now really regretting doing that. I worked on it for about the first half, and Cliff Levy took over. He's the full-time editor of it. He took over in midsummer, and I think it's a pretty tremendous piece of work, especially for like a 1.0 release. But it should be in the App Store at the beginning, I think, well, very soon. I also want to talk about other things. Let's talk about BuzzFeed for a minute. BuzzFeed is the often cited savior of news. It's the often cited destroyer of news and civilization and everything as we know it. I happen to admire much about BuzzFeed, and I happen to think that we can learn a lot from BuzzFeed, as a matter of fact. The thing that blows me away about BuzzFeed is designed around content to build and maintain an audience for that particular content. It is like a freaking guided missile at that audience. And it is designed, it is an absolute Ferrari, designed to do one thing and one thing extremely well. You have to admire it for that. And in that sense, it's a great product. And why? Because BuzzFeed understands its readers. News organizations know next to nothing about our readers. And so Snowfall, which my team did not work on, this is a graphics and design project. An amazing piece. It was launched. It was, if you looked at the comments, it was just like, it was hard to believe. It was revelation. People were looking at it and going, oh my God, I can't believe how amazing this was. And it was amazing. It drove a ton of traffic. It was shared. It blew up on social media. It was incredible. Snowfall was amazing, but let me ask another question. Did it measurably improve the reading experience for long-form journalism? We don't know. I wish we did. We know a couple of things about Snowfall. We know how many page views it generated. We know how many uniques it generated. We don't know how people actually engaged with Snowfall. We have a piece of software now on the website called Event Tracker that would allow us to track all kinds of things. We didn't have it when Snowfall was launched. So we really didn't understand whether we have done it subsequently. We've wired up a lot of these long-form pieces subsequently, but Snowfall we didn't. So in terms of a product, just looking at Snowfall, the jury's out on Snowfall. So what I'm arguing for is we need to know a heck of a lot more about our readers. We need to have a lot better analytics, and we need to understand that analytics is a fundamental core function of editorial. That if we just launch things and declare them to be success because we've launched them or because they are, beautiful or wonderful or otherwise successful, and we're just looking at the most basic web metrics to figure out whether they're actually successful, then I think we fail. So let me show you another example of something we did wire up. This is a project we did around the Oscars. Yes, very fluffy, very light, but the photo desk went back and dug out, I think it was 15 years worth of red carpet images of dresses and suits. And we decided to make kind of a searchable, filterable database out of this, and we would just keep updating it every year, because what we were doing prior to this was just creating slideshows every year, and then the slideshow would get a ton of traffic, and then it would go away. This time around, we decided, you know what, this was last year, we decided, why don't we just start creating a single place for all of this to go? And so that's what we did. And this is actually a pretty common design pattern for us for graphics. Amanda Cox on the graphics desk talks about this all the time. So at the top there, you see there's editor's picks. And at the bottom are the images and the filters and the share tools and all the devices we give you to engage with the pictures. And so the top is essentially our story. It's the kind of cool stories that we found in the data. And the bottom is, go ahead and play, reader, enjoy. Now, something like this, we would design, we would put out there, but we wouldn't have any idea, for the most part, whether this design pattern actually works. And so we decided to wire this up and test it. And as you can see, the darker shades there are the number of our clicks, level of engagement. The darker it is, the more engagement. So from this, we can tell that actually people do use the sort of our view, your view. But the darndest thing happens when you start digging into the data. You see that big chunk of purple there? All the purple dots are users who do nothing but photos. The aquamarine or teal dots are people that used one or more of the filters. As it turns out, 5% of all the readers who came to this interactive did nothing but click slides. But they didn't just click 1 slide, 2 slides, 3 slides, 5 slides. 5% clicked 500 or more slides. Like, what the hell is that about? I mean, we know people love slideshows. We know that, right? We absolutely know that. But 5% of readers did click, 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 click 500 times or more. That's crazy. I don't know necessarily what that means. It could be that we have 5% of our readers who are just completionists by nature. And if you give them a problem, they will complete it. So, you know, this leads you into other directions, though. You may ask yourself, shoot, if we're doing some crowdsourcing thing, if we're doing some kind of project that requires, you know, some sort of collaboration, is this an addressable 5%? Are these the same 5%? Are you raising your hand because you're just itching yourself, aren't you? Okay. I thought you were saying I am a completionist and I am one of the 5%. I thought you were volunteering yourself as one of our 5%. Sorry, I didn't mean to. Sorry about that. It's just a scratch. Okay. But this is a small little kind of a that's interesting kind of moment. Some other projects that are okay. So James Robinson, I covered up most of the numbers here because they get all freaked out if I show actual numbers. So that's why it's gray. But James Robinson, who's our director of newsroom analytics, is a mad scientist, and he comes up with ways to look at data, look at user interaction that go well beyond sort of page views or uniques, things like that. And this actually, he calls this thing the package mapper. And the idea here is to find out how readers are using our clustering content, right? So we think in the sense of a newsroom, we think in terms of desks for the most part. So in this case, you know, this is a fashion week. This is a set of Fashion Week stories. And it's a pretty good example because you've got stories about Fashion Week coming out of Metro, stories about Fashion Week coming out of Style, stories about Fashion Week coming off other desks. But guess what happens? They don't cross-link. They don't actually we don't treat those stories as related in any way. And so James created this tool that would allow us in real time, or close to real time, that allows us to see where the quote-unquote dead ends are. And then you can see there's a bunch of them where we're not linking that together. We did the same thing with Sochi, with our Olympics coverage in Sochi, some of which was news, some of which was sports, some of which was feature content. And there were dead ends all over the place. But it was actually quite incredible to watch. There was a couple of stories. I think there was a news piece. I forget who wrote it. I think it was Foreign, actually, wrote a piece. It was a dead end. We waltzed over there. We asked him, could you please just put a few related links on this to package it with the rest of our Olympics coverage? And boom, instantly you saw traffic circulating among those stories. So again, this is looking at content from the point of view of the reader, from the point of view of the user, not necessarily from the point of view of a bunch of editors who long ago decided we should have a Metro desk, a Style desk, a National desk, etc. This is another tool we have. This is one of his mad scientist projects called Fish Finder. And what Fish Finder does is allows us to do what a marketer would call audience segmentation. This is a very rough tool, but it allows us to say, okay, for this particular story, who do we think the target audience for this is? For this particular project, for this particular thing, who do we think that the target audience is? Who are they? What are they reading? What other sections do they visit? When are they likely to be on the site, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Why would we want to do that? Because we actually should be a little more proactive about how we put content onto our site. We aren't right now. Right now, publishing pretty much happens when the story is finished and edited. Sometimes we push it up a little bit early for a web deadline. Most of the time, it's tied to the newspaper print cycle. When do we put out our much of our, if not most of our most impactful enterprise reporting? Roughly 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Saturday. Coincidentally, when is our absolute lowest traffic in digital? 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Saturday. And why? Because it's going to be in the Sunday paper the next day. And so what ends up happening is we put something big on the homepage. It'll sit there overnight. Sunday morning, it'll be there. Someone on the homepage will say, well, I need to freshen the page up. They'll move it down. Based on what? I don't know, because they feel like they have to freshen the page. They move it down. The investigations folks lose their mind. Maybe they move it back up. But this is how we're doing what we do right now. Now compare that to BuzzFeed. What BuzzFeed does, beginning to end, is data-driven. Am I sitting here telling you that we should be looking at the equivalent of a Chartbeat top 10 list and just be moving stuff up, or God forbid, algorithmically putting stuff up? No, absolutely not. But we should be proactively saying to ourselves, how can we, with this piece of journalism, let's go back to Snowfall, actually, as an example. Snowfall is an interesting example because we launched that on Twitter. Some of you have heard this before, so you can just take a quick break. We launched that project on Twitter. People gave us a lot of credit for that because they thought, wow, that was really smart of the New York Times. Launched that thing on Twitter, put a bunch of links on Twitter before it appeared on the, well, that was actually not deliberate. Our sports editor asked us, then sports editor Joe Sexton asked us to create a server, put the first chapter on a server for some influentials that he wanted to kind of like, it's like 50 people or so he wanted to have them take a look at what we're, hey, we're about to publish this thing. We put it on a server that had about the same, horsepower as my phone. We put a very basic HTTP auth on it. And he got a little fidgety and decided he was going to tweet it. And he had David Carr, and I forget who else tweet it. It might have been Brian Stelter and a couple other people tweet it. And as a result of that, it went apeshit crazy on Twitter. All of a sudden, thank God, somebody on the graphics desk noticed it, and let us know. So we were frantically pulling down the HTTP auth because a lot of people were saying, hey, we're getting an error here. Because, of course, immediately what happened is people stripped off the username and password and just passed the link. So you were getting this lovely Apache error message. But I was watching this going, holy cow, this is going crazy on Twitter. We ended up with, I don't know, we had bad analytics on it, or actually no analytics to begin with, and then kind of bad analytics. But we were talking about hundreds of thousands of page views with no link anywhere on nytimes.com. So what do you learn from something like that? One, never give a link with a username and password to the sports editor, Joe Sexton, number one. Number two, that we should actually be doing this kind of thing proactively. We should be thinking, we should be stepping back and saying, okay, this is a piece of journalism that's targeted at a particular audience. It's about extreme sports. It's going to appeal to this sort of reader. Are they more likely or less likely to be on social? Are they going to be more likely to be on social? It's an amazing multimedia piece that works incredibly well on social. How should we roll a piece of journalism like this out? We should be launching this stuff, not just tossing it onto the homepage, which is kind of what we do now. And that's an appeal for metrics. Upworthy, you may know, has started developing metrics that reflect better the kinds of things that they care about, user behavior that they want to encourage. Attention minutes is their metric. Medium. What is theirs again? Why am I forgetting? It is what? Oh, total time reading. It's right there in the headline. That's right. It's right there in the headline. I was testing you. Yeah. But this is where we need to head, right? This is where we need to be headed. We need to be headed in a direction where we're using metrics to better understand our readers, to better understand our users, to take the content we do make, this amazing journalism that we create, and make sure it has the best possible chance of having the biggest audience, of being relevant to the most people, the people who would want to read that, find it. People who want to experience it, find it. We did a project that actually sort of accidentally fell into that category a couple years, many years ago, a school book. This was kind of a typical project for us at the beginning. The education editor came to us and said, hey, it's school report card time again, and we need to update the school report cards, and we'd like to be super ambitious this year. And we said, no, we're not going to be super ambitious this year. We're going to do exactly what we did last year. Why? She said back, well, because school report cards pretty much do this. You put them out, boom, they spike, everybody looks up their school, then boom, right back down to like 0, and it just flatlines for 364 more days until the next, and then boom. And I just said, it was like, we're not going to do that. But if you want to do something really ambitious around coverage, around news, data, around education coverage, local education coverage and data, you know, let's talk about that. And so she took us up on it, and Schoolbook was the result. This ended up being a collaboration across, God, I don't know, 5 desks. It involved us, graphics, design, education. But we sat around a table and we just did kind of a blue sky. What would we do if we were to start from scratch and build a site? Who would be the target audience of this? So we actually went and talked to people. Wow. Can you imagine? We went and talked to people. We went and talked to administrators. We went to talk to parents. We went to talk to teachers. We went and talked to them and said, hey, what is it? How can we actually help you better understand what's going on in schools? We thought about problems like, okay, how are we going to get an audience to this site? How are we going to maintain an audience on this site? Because, you know, the problem with education coverage, particularly at a paper like the New York Times, which covers the world, is that it doesn't tend to reach the homepage that often, or the front page, unless there's a big scandal, or there's something really significant, right? It tends to not get that much attention or get that much play. And so we thought, well, God, could we find another way, an alternate route to get parents to this site? And so we actually partnered with WNYC, with the local public radio station, WNYC, and Brian Lehrer, who does a lot of great local coverage. And WNYC actually thought this was a fantastic idea. John Keefe, who is their data, he runs their data team, and I kind of like hatched this idea over Chick-fil-A in Raleigh, North Carolina, a couple years ago. And this is what we did. We launched it. And so what happened? We built an audience. We built a pretty darn big audience, an audience that was between a top 20 and top 15 blog for us almost overnight. People were coming back. It was actually doing pretty well. And considering the very narrow topic, I was actually very pleased with that. There were things that weren't working. The conversation piece, we were experimenting with some other stuff. We were experimenting with Facebook login, which was a total disaster. As it turns out, teachers and parents were very reluctant to use Facebook as just generally, or any social. And so Facebook login as a means of authentication didn't work. But there were things that were huge successes. And so what we ended up doing was keeping and maintaining an audience. You know, the New York Times is usually the largest referrer to most of our blogs. Most of our blogs. The New York Times is a top referrer. New York Times wasn't a top 25 referrer to Schoolbook. So on almost every level, it was succeeding. For a variety of reasons that I will not get into, we decided not to continue this partnership about 7 months later. But as a product, this worked. And to me, this is kind of the template of how newsrooms should be thinking about building things. Now, a site that I'm, oops, not that, that. A site that in that same vein that I'm absolutely obsessed with is this one. It's called DeCorrespondent. It just launched in September of last year. It's based in the Netherlands. It was a group of journalists, designers, coders, working in a couple of their cases at sort of established media organizations, thought they got tired of sort of legacy media and thought, you know what, we're going to do something completely different. We're going to do it better. And so they came up with this idea. They crowdfunded it. They raised something like $1.5 million, something like that, which is a ton of money considering how small the country is. And they launched it in September 2013. It is pay. It's a pay site. They have something like 30,000 subscribers paying $80 a month right now. There's a lot of news nonprofits out there that would love to have 30,000 subscribers paying, well, anything, much less $80, sorry, $80 a year. Did I say a month? A year? Pardon me. A year, but still pretty amazing, still pretty amazing. What do I like about this is it has, as Tom Bodkin, who runs the art department and graphics and everything else at times likes to say, it has thingness, right? It's a whole. Everything is designed, much like going back to the BuzzFeed example. It's all designed as a heat-seeking missile to target a particular audience of people and do it well and keep them engaged. So this is what they like to call the garden. And here, this is where they have hired something like 6 or 7 journalists, well-known journalists, to be writers for D-Correspondent. Each of them has a particular beat or topic of expertise. They write commentary. Sometimes they write investigative pieces or reporting. But there's a constant churn of content. But it's not just the content that keeps people coming back. This is the garden. So here you can subscribe to a particular reporter by hitting that little plus right there. And so you then are getting their feed in whatever form you want. It could be email, it could be social. Their idea is that this should come to you. You should not be required to return to this site again and again and again to see if there's anything new. You tell them how you want to receive this. A lot of people take it in email form, some in social, some via like Twitter or something like that. They try to build, it is a requirement of this reporter. They call it a garden for a reason. The reporter was hired because they are willing to tend this garden. This is where they build an audience, right here. And so this reporter participates in comments. Only subscribers can comment. Only subscribers can see comments. And this reporter also has the ability, in certain cases, to elevate a really good, pithy comment into the feed, which then you would see. I love that particular feature. Once in a blue moon, if a commenter is really, really good, they can ask that person to write a piece, and it shows up as a full-fledged story. But again, in their feed and sort of presented by, right? It's like a Tarantino project. It's presented by this reporter, right? But again, this is their garden. They're growing a lot of things in this garden. I love the way they do sharing. So they have obviously they have a problem, right? So if we're a closed site, we're a subscription-only site, how do we acquire audience? Well, they have a very clever means to do that, that again is all focused around community. A subscriber can share an article via social, via email, whatever. When that happens, the subscriber, there's a little tag that goes with it in the short code of the URL. When you click on that link and come back to the site, a little yellow bar drops down on the top, and it says, this article was shared with you by a person. Again, it's just a little personal touch. I think that's kind of genius. And it adds to this idea that, you know, this isn't really free. This is here. This is high quality. I thought you would want it. And I shared it with you. And it's just a little reminder that there are people here. I think these guys are brilliant. There's some of them. And I love what they're trying to do. But they just launched in September of last year. It's a yearly contract. We'll see. September is going to be a big month for them because a lot of those subscriptions are going to come up, and we'll see if they re-renew. And I'm hopeful. So to wrap all this up, design, knowing our reader, doing a better job at being reader-centered, user-centered. I think to me it's about like survival. We have to be doing this sort of thing. Will it work? I have no idea. I certainly hope so. I just wanted to throw this quote in because I love it. Has nothing to do with what I just talked about, but Nick Denton cracks me up. But I feel pretty strongly if we don't do this sort of thing, if we don't make this a matter of a standard procedure for newsrooms, we're all pretty much in trouble. And I'm not even sure that Nick Denton will be right about the New York Times and others being the survivor and being that little tweeting thing you see flying around. Thanks a lot. Questions? How long? How long? Probably about 10 minutes. Okay. person? Oh, way in the back there.
Where was that question from?
So when you're testing things out, like Just Enough News, you talked about that one. How are you actually testing that? Are you going into the field and talking to people? Is it more remote? Yeah, how do you do that?
In the cases that I've been involved with, it's both. I'm on my third iteration with the particular with the particular consultant that we're using. I'm in my third iteration, third product with him, and so it could be either way. We prefer to do it in person because it's just a little more. You can kind of get some body language and things like that. But generally, it could be either way. But yeah, we're testing with actual human beings, people who meet certain criteria, like our target audience, whatever we think they are.
Got one here.
Question on the user, and in this case, the user being the actual journalists who are creating the content. How do you decide when you're making products or to make a product that will make that process easier? You were talking about Event Tracker, but then you're also talking about the mad scientist who builds dashboards for your own analytics.
Right.
Sort of, how do you decide to prioritize the products for the people who are going to be creating the content?
That's a great question. I mean, we like graphics, there's like 4 or 5 desks that all kind of do this kind of work, what falls sort of vaguely into the blanket category of data journalism or interactives or whatever you want to call it. And so we all operate pretty much the same way, which is essentially as news desks. So we prioritize based on what's most newsworthy, what we think will actually move the needle. There's not really a scientific process behind it. I'm not sure I would necessarily want one. I think what you can do though is you can test before to see the size of commitment you want to make, right? Even if something you feel is an important project, you might do a certain amount of testing ahead of time and say, I mean, I can think of certain enterprise stories that we've done and put a lot of effort into that haven't done so great, and knowing ahead of time that the addressable audience or the likely audience for a piece of content like that might be relatively small may actually help you decide whether this is something you want to spend a lot of time on or not. That's where sort of the audience segmentation piece comes into it. I don't want to stress that too much, because what I'm not saying under any circumstances is that we should be, product testing news. I mean, that's absolutely not what I'm saying. But we are so far from that right now. I mean, that's like a natural response, right? Oh my God, you're talking about product testing news. Oh my God, you're talking about algorithmically driving news. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. We are so far from that right now it's ridiculous to even raise that. So I'm arguing with myself up here, right? That's silly too.
Hi, I really appreciated your point on absolutely more rigorous analytics in guiding the way that you present stories. I'm wondering if you get any pushback from journalists and others who are working on their stories that are protective of the issues and stories they're working on and maybe fearful or apprehensive about what you will find if you're more rigorous, and how you're responding to that protectivism.
Well, so the analytics team in the newsroom is not even a year old, and we really haven't reached that point. But we're mindful that is almost certainly going to happen. We're going to have to address that at some point. To this point, it hasn't really been an issue because we haven't really been sharing a lot of this beyond a fairly select audience. Package Mapper we've been sharing selectively. That's a relatively new tool, though. We have been doing a little bit with Fish Finder, but that's mainly around specific projects, like the Leonhardt project, for example. We're doing a lot of work around that. I don't know. It's an open question how much you want to share with the newsroom as a whole, because numbers can be interpreted very much the wrong way. So I'm pretty conservative when it comes to that, I guess. And when we get to the point where we're deciding what to share with reporters, I think we're gonna want to share numbers, but I think we're gonna want to share them in context. And I think you can do it in ways that are actually that are smarter than just like a top 10 list, right? That's where the sort of chart beatification of news kind of bothers me a little bit. You're kind of comparing apples and oranges. When you're comparing foreign coverage to Fashion Week, that is an apples to oranges comparison, right? So I think better to look within sort of lines of coverage, which is frankly what I'm absolutely arguing for with audience segmentation, which is finally let's put a denominator on that numerator. Let's not just say, like James, when he first came down, was talking about, well, how, something gets 150,000 page views. Is that good? Well, he says, his view is that people kind of view that data the way they view salaries. So 6 figures is pretty good. 5 figures, 7 figures, 8 figures, holy shit. That's kind of how people view that data, and that's a very simplistic view of it. And so, yeah, I'm sort of not answering the question because we haven't really addressed it, but I do think we're going to be relatively conservative about what we do put out in the wild, and probably more encouraging. We're going to err more on the encouraging side and more sort of on the in context, definitely in context, than not. But we haven't really faced that question yet.
I had a question that was driven over here.
Oh, hi.
Partly driven by the example that you gave of the tool that was showing the dead ends of related stories.
Data
Now,
mapper.
I've been reading American newspapers on the web for 15 or more years. And over that time, many newspapers, Times, Washington Post, et cetera, they've tried different strategies, NPR, for creating related story links in the story that you're reading.
Right.
And it used to be much more ambitious than it is now.
Yeah.
And there were also various experiments for showing you what your social network friends were reading over in the right-hand column.
Right.
Do we learn anything from history? I mean, did anyone actually decide that this was working or it wasn't working, or was it just a matter of, oh, that's too much work, we don't think it's worthwhile, let's forget about it?
Well, I'm not sure that there's much to be learned from something like Data Mapper. That I don't think Data Mapper is taking what we already know much beyond what we already know, and that is to say that putting a related link into a story where a reader is probably most likely to click on a related link, it just makes sense. But we still don't do it often enough. All Package Mapper does for us is sort of automate, well, not totally automate yet, but gives us a tool to kind of see where that's not happening in real time. It's more, I think what it moves forward is our ability to find the places where we're actually not doing that particularly well a little bit more easily, and to visually kind of represent that failure in ways that editors or producers might be more inclined to respond to. That's all it's doing. So I think we have learned. I think we've learned that related links generally work. Horizontal navigation, when it's done right, generally works. But yet and still, we just don't always do it, which is part of the problem. When the Metro Desk puts out an Olympics-related story and doesn't put any Olympics-related links or navigation in it, it's a problem. That's a problem. So, hello.
So I'll come to Ben, and then I'll start going over that side.
How often are you looking at what your target audience is, seeing that that's not an audience that you really have at the time, and actually choosing to invest the time and try to get that audience?
Ooh, that's a great question. I would say we have not spent a ton of time doing the last one yet, but I think that's a really interesting and obvious sort of next step with something like this. It's like, well, what is an audience that we think we can get, and where can we get that audience, and how? And so in a sense, Schoolbook was kind of that, right? We didn't have any of the tools to kind of demonstrate it, but that's kind of the idea, is that we were utilizing a partnership with WNYC. WNYC was actually incredibly instrumental in generating an audience and helping us build an audience around Schoolbook. We walked into this with an assumption, we should have done a provocation had I known of such a thing at the time, that we assumed that the audience of the New York Times and WNYC were more or less the same audience. And as it turns out, they're actually not, at least in the case of local education. They certainly were not. So we haven't gotten to the point where we're actually asking the question, okay, great, we're doing this. Here's the audience for that. Here's a place we could, or some mechanism we could try to grow that audience or to make that audience larger. We haven't gotten to that point yet, but I actually think that we're not that far away from that point. That's where we got to go.
How many more questions have we got?
We can take a couple more.
Couple more. Are there any over there? I'm coming to Ben next. All right, I'll come over there. All right.
Hi, thank you. I appreciate your concern about releasing the raw numbers, and my question builds on the previous one in that I'm looking for some comments from you about a little more selectivity about what the audiences you're seeking are. Bill Keller had clearly enunciated that he wanted stories that had impact on politicians, on business decision makers, so it wasn't the numbers of viewers. And if you want to just pump up the number of viewers, the number stats will get that to happen. What you measure is what you get. Okay, you know, and if, you know, I haven't heard a theory or a framework that says what you want to be as a newspaper and what kind of measures of influence you think would be valuable. Do you want to reach your current paying readers or just, you know, reach lots of high school kids with some tantalizing story?
Well, I mean, all of that would be great, by the way, but I mean, this is kind of the problem, right? Because right now, newsrooms are doing none of the kinds of things you're talking about. Right now, well, no, they're not. I'm in one, I'm telling you. There is no metric for impact whatsoever. The best metrics we have are enormously flawed. It's page views and uniques. And you know as well as I do, if we put a Justin Bieber story on the homepage next to a David Barstow story, you know which one. I don't have to do an A/B test to tell you which one's going to get more clicks. So looking for clicks is not at all. In fact, what we're looking for is the opposite of clicks. We're looking for something else. We're looking to try to find, in the way that Upworthy and Medium are trying to devise metrics that actually encourage or measure the behavior that they think are most impactful for their particular product, we need to be thinking the same way. And we're not. And we're absolutely not. And so what Fish Finder is one tiny little baby step in that direction. But we need to go way further down this road. And the form of impact you're talking about is certainly one form of impact, right? Investigative reporting. Do laws get changed? Does the bastard go to jail? You know, things like that. Those are sort of binary metrics, right? And sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. I've written pieces back in the day that I thought, man, this is going to nail it, and nothing happens. Everything just keeps on going the way it is, and it drives me crazy, but that's journalism for you. I think we need to get a little more sophisticated in the kinds of measurements that we're looking at, and with a specific focus on impact and defining that. Explanatory journalism can have an enormous impact, but for the most part, nobody's going to go to jail because of a great piece of explanatory journalism. However, laws may change, perceptions may change, behavior may change. And there are ways to measure all of those things, right? There are ways that you can. There are actually statistically valid ways to do that. We're just not doing any of it, and I think we should. That's kind of what I'm saying.
That was kind of my question, but you used to measure. I mean, I would imagine that it used to be important. How many stories did they break?
Right.
How many pickups did they get from other publications? I mean, these things used to be very, very important, and they're measurable. Do those go into your calculations at all, or is it?
Well, the difference between how many stories do they break and how many other places do they get picked up is those are proxies for something else, right? Those are proxies for actual behavior, actual change. The beauty of digital is that you can sometimes measure the actual change.
So you're saying it all boils down to readers?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, doesn't it? I mean, why are we writing? What are we doing journalism for if not for the reader, right? I mean, if we're not, why would we write a big piece
I don't
of?
know. I think breaking stories and keeping them alive and following through is what maybe not what. I guess that comes back to influence. There are certain people who are very interested in that, and that's
Sure.
why they read the New York Times.
Sure.
But it might not translate into numbers.
I mean, sometimes your reader, sometimes, you know, Dick Toffel at ProPublica wrote an amazing paper, a white paper about impact. I think if you Google it, you'll probably find it. What's that? Oh, there you go. Scott Klein of ProPublica just tweeted it. It's terrific. It's a terrific paper because it talks about a very specific kind of journalism, right? And how you measure impact of that specific kind of journalism. And that, you know, there are ways to do that. I'm talking about, and yes, you're totally right. That is certainly one way to do it. In a case like that, your audience, your reader, might be one person, might be the governor, right? The governor who decides to exonerate or to pardon a prisoner who's wrongly convicted of something. And that's impact. Boom. But that's like a tiny fraction of journalism. And if we're not able to measure the 98% of journalism that we're doing, beat reporting, explanatory reporting, just the kinds of things we're doing as a matter of course, at a time when resources are shrinking, you know, we can't just keep doing this like by gut feel, right? Let me tell you a quick, do I have time for a quick story? I have. Okay, quick story. So for years, our homepage editors were told, you need to change the photo on the homepage once an hour. Once an hour. And so James asked why. Why do you change this once an hour? Actually, to be fair, Ian Fisher, the AME, changed it to once every 2 hours when he took over because he thought there was just too much work to change it. But there's not always a great image every hour. So he said, okay, do it every 2 hours. James asked why. Why are you doing that? Well, the feeling was, what happens is when a reader comes back to the homepage and sees the same image, they'll just navigate away. They'll see that nothing has changed, and they'll navigate away. Okay, well, how do you know that? Do you have any data? No, of course not. We've never measured such a thing. So James did. James went and looked and saw whether the click-through rate for return visitors when the photo was exactly the same, whether nothing had changed, something had changed, does the click-through rate go up, stay the same, or go down? What do you think the answer was? It didn't go down. It didn't even stay the same. Weirdly, it actually seems to go up. We're not really sure why, but it seems to go up. Maybe people are looking for something else on the page. Maybe they're, who knows? But this sort of folk logic that we use, this kind of gut instinct we use to run media organizations in 2014, I mean, that kind of stuff, that's real money there, right? Having a homepage editor change the image, of course, I'm not saying we should never change the homepage, let's, you know, but having somebody change the image, cut, crop, select an image once an hour, that is the sound of money being wasted. And we don't have the money to waste. So this is what I'm kind of getting at, right? This is what we need to be smarter about and where we need to be. Anyway, I'm totally out of time. One more?
Okay.
All right, thank you very much.
No, one more.
Oh, you have one. Sorry, hold on, sorry. The encore question.
So following on from what you were saying about the education, the special education piece that you built, if you're building a community around a certain product and it's not your usual New York Times reader,
Right.
then how do you convert those new people you're bringing
Right.
into that community as loyal readers?
Well, I mean, that's a...
And are you looking at that?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And Schoolbook was was the sort of project where we might have tried to do that. It only lasted, we were only part of it for about 7 or 8 months. We never really got to that point. You know, Leonhardt is the kind of project where we may do stuff like that. There are selective projects, you know, sites that we create that are kind of have, as Tom likes to say, thingness about them, that we could look to say, how do we create a very loyal audience around this thing? We've seen it happen. Well readers, you know, the Well blog, Tara Parker Pope, has an incredibly loyal audience. And we can go, and what we want to do is look at that audience. Like, what is it is there something about that audience in particular, their behavior, who they are, their reading habits? can we find ways to kind of like take what we learned there and actually apply it elsewhere? Because she does an amazing job, and she's attracted an incredibly loyal audience. Dealbook is the same way. Yeah, we want to do that. It's just we never did it with Schoolbook.
Great, thank you, Aron.
Yeah.